any type of the doubts or any questions or any plans ahead regarding that, if they want any information in respect of epidemiology, then they can ask. So again, other announcements are also there. Those online participants who have not registered, so they can still register, please, and upload your registration slip again on whatever that Google form is being given. And there is the email ID given on the group, email ID shared. So on that email ID, you can just submit your whatever solved those question paper is been given to you. So if you have been finished, you can submit your those questionnaires. And if you have any questions or any doubts, then you can ask, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi, for that wonderful introduction in the morning again. So what we will do now is for the next hour, we'll open up for discussions, more so trying to answer questions if you have about the lectures that we did from 1 through 16 in the epidemiology course. This is both for people who are in class and also for those who are online. What I would like to request is if you have questions, if you put it in the chat mode, please give a more elaborate type of a write-up so that it becomes easier for me to understand. Much better would be is if you open up your video and if you open up your unmute yourself and ask the question, that becomes much easier for me to fully understand where you're coming from. So with that, I will leave the floor open for discussions, anything and everything related to epidemiology, if I know the answer, or I'll go find it for you. So once again, let's go ahead and start doing it. Thank you. Rothman, Rothman. So he has laid out a very nice approach as to how to do SIR modeling. Okay. So that's the book that we use for master's and PhD level students. Actually, I think Rothman has changed to Nelson now. Let me look at it. But the best one would be for descriptive and analytical epidemiology, other than modeling, is to go to the CDC manual itself. So the CDC has itself a epidemiology training manual that they conduct for 14 days in CDC Atlanta. And that's the exact material I'm using for teaching. But of course, I modified it to meet the needs of the class. So that's what I have done. So it is the CDC, and I've provided the resources on the opening page of the initial. Yep. And many of these courses are also offered through the Penn State online World Campus. So there are advanced courses that relate to disease modeling, epidemiology that we offer through the World Campus. It's online. There'll be usually one lecture that's provided. The other lecture is virtual. So typically we tend to have alternate processes through the World Campus. So I would encourage you to look at some of the courses that are being offered. Another place to look at in terms of proximity to me is the College of Medicine at Penn State in Hershey has got an excellent department of epidemiology, and they also offer courses online. So if there are any specific applications that you feel that you would like to learn about, I would highly encourage you to go and visit, or just drop me an email. I'll be able to direct you to the place where you should be looking for. I can definitely do that. But however, when it comes to disease modeling, as you said, we require couple of things. One is we need to know the population. Then we need to know, has the outbreak started? So if you get a hint to get an outbreak started, then you need to know, let's take an example of a dairy farm or a village with 20 different dairies. And then you're looking at the population. So what is the population of number of lactating young, non-lactating cows in that given area? So that becomes the very starting point on T0. So what's your population? How many animals are showing the clinical signs? That becomes the infected. And there are animals that if you're able to have a test to say that they have recovered from the illness, they become into the recovered category. So those are some of the things you have to first establish in terms of parameters. Then if you know the infectious agent, for example, if it is Pasteurella pneumoniae, Pasteurella multicida, or Pasteurella hemolytica, you should be able to know the R0 for it, or you should be able to know the rate of transmission that takes place from cow to cow if one cow is actively infected. Then what is the likelihood that the other cow will really come down with the infection when exposed? So if you're able to quantitate the P and the Q, you're pretty much set to run the model. Pretty much set to run the model. Again, we are assuming that all the cows with Pasteurella hemolytica will survive. So those are some of the exceptions we need to be aware of. And based on that, if there is a higher mortality or mortality is going to be included, then you need to look in the SEIR model. Okay, so there are different variations of it. And again, it's a specialized course by itself where we do disease modeling using R as the software. Most of it we use R. And that is free, downloadable. You can download that software and start working with it. It's a little difficult. It's cumbersome. It's not easy. It's better to, again, work with somebody who knows to use R or has learned how to use the software. Yeah. Yes, it's a good one. It takes time to learn. And that's the trend. That's the current trend.
Doing some analysis.
You're doing some analysis. Oh, fantastic. What kind of analysis are you doing? Okay. And okay. Wonderful. And what are you studying actually? No, the big picture in terms of your ecological model. What are you looking at? Okay. Okay. Oh, is that right? Oh, okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. Right. How do you compute the biological behavior of the ticks? See, everyone has, as tick has a certain behavior, right, in the environment. Or distribution. Why don't you can actually put it on? You can speak to, sir. Yep.
Actually, I had no idea about anything
Okay.
when we proposed the study.
Okay.
But that's why at that time we have proposed entire Maharashtra. So
Okay.
the sample collection.
That's an ambitious project.
Now I realized,
Yeah.
if I would have restricted to one district or only for region only. So even if Marathwada is considered,
Right.
it is also having variations in agroclimatic zones.
Right. Right. For us,
That would have also
and
solved my purpose.
Yeah, the way I was looking at it is a little different.
Sir.
I was looking at it based on the biology of the tick. What is the risk at what point during the day? Say we know for sure, the feeding habits of ticks. So they usually wait on the tip of the grass at a very low level. And if animal or human being passes, they kind of latch onto that particular process. We see it just before sunrise and just during sunset. That's when the highest. So if people are going for a trek or going for a walk.
I also surveyed the 200 farmers till now.
Okay.
So their observation is that ticks, they see the ticks only after 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock,
7 o'clock.
night only.
Okay, okay.
In morning they don't. Morning to evening they don't see.
They don't know.
It will be
Yep.
they are attached to body of
Yeah. And are you going to be looking for any? Vector-borne disease laboratory and type in East Stroudsburg University. They got an East Stroudsburg University. They have an excellent field investigation group, and then done some enormous work on ticks, just phenomenal work on ticks. So anything that comes to us in forms of ticks from a clinical setting, we usually consult them. Yeah. So look for East Stroudsburg, and she just got hired as the director. She was an assistant director for a very long time, and now she's been made the full director. So she's a very nice person to work with. I would, yeah, look into it and look into their website and their publications. That will be a good group to work with. So do you have any questions about the take-home test? I'm sure many of you have. I would be happy to go through them. If you would like me to, I would be happy to do that. If we don't have any questions online, I would be more than happy to walk you through it. Is there any consensus among the group or
online? No questions.
yeah, I'm waiting. Yeah, let's see. If there should be a consensus, then only I will do it.
Bhaskar sir, shall we walk through this thing?
Test.
Take home test. Right. First question to we can walk through.
You want me
Right
to
now
do
there
that?
are no questions. No? We'll open that file and Anupama.
Why don't you announce that I will be going over the take-home test? Want to do that?
Hello. All the participants are informed that respected Dr. Bhushan Jairao sir is going through now that take-home test paper. So discussion will be done on that. And if anybody has any questions regarding that, they can just participate in that discussion.
Okay, so you can open up your test. And I'll probably walk you.
Yeah, Mike, sir.
Mike.
वो माइक वहाँ पे कुछ प्रॉब्लम
कोई दिक्कत नहीं माइक फिक्स कर देंगे
लगा देते
हाँ ये सबसे अच्छा होगा यहाँ पे लगा दो
Page view.
Okay, go to page width. Okay, cool. Thanks, man. Okay, let's go to the answers. Ah, sure.
Ima expectation. ¿Dónde guardo?
Okay, so
Okay.
let's start off with so the definition of epidemiology. The very three things I would always like you to keep in mind is distribution, determinants, population. That's what we start the lecture with, and that's what we will end the lecture with. It's distributions, determinants, and populations. The entire 16 lectures can be summarized into those three terms. Then we talk about the process of infectivity. It's a characteristic of the agent. Three things: entry, survival, and multiplication. Then what do we talk about? What are the factors that we call as determinants? It can be host, agent, and environment. And this was a kind of a question that I had earlier asked, is to look at the five specific objectives of epidemiology. Usually I just don't put it. I ask you to give me examples for them. So what could be the first example? Identify the etiology and risk factors. Why do we do it? To know the etiological agent.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have to tell you anything. And you guys scratching your head and saying, "It sounds like-" Next is the extent of the disease found in the population. So in other words, we are seeing is the distribution. Next is the natural history of the disease and prognosis, followed by what are the ways we can evaluate new preventive and curative measures. You develop a vaccine, you develop a prevention protocol, see if it works, because that needs to be evaluated, see if it is giving the results for the process. And more importantly, people who are administrators, who are especially in the public health realm, they can use a lot of the data for developing policies and making regulatory decisions. So, what are the three types of prevention? Primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay? So again, natural history of the disease, its pre-exposure, preclinical, clinical, and resolution. And this is something which I didn't really talk about in the class. This is related to the US. So the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, went back and looked at what were the 10 greatest public health achievements from 1900 to 2000. Okay, the exact 100 years. And they have come up with the top 10 of the items. What I put here is the first one on the list is vaccination. We were able to reduce childhood mortality by introducing childhood vaccines. That was one of the significant accomplishments. Along with that, improved hygiene practices, food safety practices, better public, what I would say, sanitation practices, elimination of vectors, reduction of vectors, control of infectious disease, safer and healthier foods, healthier mother and babies, and fluoridation of drinking water. So all of these have contributed to the extended life, and I mentioned in one of my slides, between 20 to 25 years. So all of these public health efforts have allowed us to increase not only the life expectancy by 20 to 25 years, but also the quality of life. It's just that you don't need to live, you need to enjoy life too. So that's what we tend to use as a sense of measurement here. Okay? Of course, then we'll move on and talk about multiple choices. These are pretty simple, straightforward. Again, the last one here is it's kind of a little messed up part, but the answer is 1, 2, 3, and 4, which talks about the core concepts of epidemiology as it relates to transmission. Now here, rubella immunization, when we talk about it, in other words, we are looking at it from a herd immunity point of view. If all of the children are vaccinated, or a significant portion of the children are vaccinated, they provide passive immunity to the mothers by creating herd immunity around them. So here is a kind of a question that I typically tend to ask in my undergraduate, sometimes in graduate level. The question is, several passengers on a cruise ship from Puerto Rico to Panama Canal have recently developed a gastrointestinal illness compatible with norovirus, formerly called as Norwalk-like virus. Testing of the norovirus is not readily available in any by near island. You're on a cruise ship, you can't do any testing. And the test takes several days, even several days where it is available. Assuming you're the epidemiologist, you're called upon on a helicopter and you board the ship. And then they say, why don't you start an investigation? Okay? What should your criteria to start the investigation should be? Is it clinical criteria, specification of time, personnel place? In other words, you're developing a very rudimentary case definition. Okay? But I like the last one much better. The agreed standard case definition between the captain and the bartender of the ship. Nobody has taken that question so far in the last 12 years when I've been teaching epidemiology, but I suspect one of these days I will have one of my students go and say, D is the right answer. So with that, let's move on to the next one. When we talk about epidemic curve, this is very central to the process of understanding a disease outbreak or how a disease outbreak is shaping up. So while doing this epidemic curve, it allows us to examine the spread of the disease, the magnitude, the outliers, time trend, and exposure and disease incubation periods. So here is the problem. The problem we asked is largely looking at calculating the attack rate and secondary attack rate. And this is the process. One is I've asked you to show me the formula. One is the number of cases of disease divided by the number of people at risk for a limited time. That's the attack rates for the students in the middle school. So the way we calculate it, it's about 20%. Okay? And the attack, and the more importantly is focus on the interpretation. That has to be solid. Nobody should be able to shake your on that, the way you write it. So the interpretation is the attack rate of salmonellosis in the MCS was 20% of the school children who visited the dairy farm April 2nd and 20th. So now let's go and calculate the secondary attack rate. Secondary attack rate comprises of the number of cases of contacts, not contracts, of primary cases during the period times 100. That's what we are using as a K divided by the total number of contacts. And the answer is 7.1, I believe, 7.1%. Are you able to all get this, Ron? Was this easy to go through it? Okay, excellent. Now, true and false, I'm not going to spend much time unless and until you have something that you feel I wrongly marked as true or false. I'm capable of doing that. So just want you to follow up and see if you got your answers right, if you have checked it out. I didn't do YPLL models or daily models. That's much higher because I would expect you to compute the process, but all I come back to do another epidemiology course was daily will be a part of it. Ratios is a subdivision of two unrelated numbers. We go on. Okay, match the correct answers. This is where most of my students lose marks. Is to take an example, direct contact, and I've given several different examples, and I'm also giving you the whole list of. You don't even have to remember what they are, as long as you're able to identify it, because many of the transmission processes are best understood by using an example. So that's why I have put it here. So keep in mind, this is a good way of testing the ability of the student to understand the different modes of transmission using an example. And here is an example of 4 variables. This is, again, many times people don't get this right. So these are the answers. It is A, B, D, C. And I'll leave this one up here. This is where we take the actual numbers and then assign and say whether the disease is sporadic, endemic, pandemic, or epidemic. So the first one is there are 22 cases of legionellosis occurring in 3 weeks amongst residents in a particular neighborhood. Usually, the number of cases occur between 0 to 1. Here we are seeing 22 cases. So as it's an epidemic. Everybody on board? Okay, great. So the next one is over 20 million people worldwide die from avian influenza. Very much a C. Single case of histoplasmosis diagnosed in the community sporadic. The last one is about 60 cases of malaria was usually reported in the region per week, slightly less than the national average. That's B. So keep in mind how we are able to utilize these terms. And when we utilize these terms, what are the best available examples to understand it? Again, it comes to the same process here. And I talked about the different types of these histograms and how they appear. 21 cases of shigellosis among children and workers at a daycare center over a 6-week period. No external source identified. Incubation period for shigellosis is usually 1 days. No external source has been identified. So therefore, it's tropical. Next one is 36 cases of giardiasis over a 6-week period traced to occasional use of supplementary water reservoir tank used by the municipality. Small town. Incubation for giardiasis ranges anywhere between 3 to 25 days or more, usually 7 to 10 days. What is it? It's intermittent or continuous. So it's dependent on how that water was released from that tank. Last is 43 cases of norovirus infection over 2 days, traced to the ice machine on a cruise ship. So what's that? It's a point source. You know it's coming out from the ice machine. So that's the first part. You're done. Okay, that was easy, wasn't it? Okay, let's go ahead and do the next part of it. This is usually I divide my lectures into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, 8 lectures, and then another 8 lectures. So the next set of the lectures where this is what we talk about. We would like you to fill in the blanks, try and understand when I ask for an answer. The best is find is the ability to identify who have the disease. That means we are looking at the sensitivity. Those that do not have the disease, we are looking at specifics. Positive predictive value determines relationship with sensitivity, specificity. This is my prevalence. We change the prevalence, predictive values change, especially the positive predictive value change. And one of the types of surveillance, active surveillance is done by local, state, or health departments and initiate collection of specific cases of disease. And passive surveillance is they receive the information without even requesting it. The reason being is the system has been set up to receive those kinds of information on diseases that are reportable in nature. So the next one is list 3 assumptions upon which the SIR model is based. Everyone recovers, permanent immunity when recovered, total large population, fixed in size, and confined to a job. Later. How can you define a basic reproductive number, R0? R0 is greater than 1. So it's equal to 1, which is an endemic stage. If it is less than 1, we have been successful in controlling the epidemic. Keep this in mind. This is where is the very initial stage. If you want to go into the depth of understanding disease modeling, you need to spend a lot of time trying to understand what is R0. So here, in order to calculate an R0, we need 3 important things. One is to know the number of contacts per day, the transmission problem contact, and the duration of the infectiousness. We are able to identify those attributes to each of this that will help you to calculate R0. And keep in mind, the transmission probability of contact usually is the one that's the most variable. That is where that makes the picture is how many people are likely to be. So this is the one that changes the numbers from R0 depending on transmission. So let's again switch over and talk about some of the multiple choices. The hallmark of an analytic epidemiology study is a comparison. We must have a comparison. A study in which adults are randomly assigned to receive either a newly formulated vaccine or a currently available vaccine and are followed to monitor the side effects and the effectiveness of each vaccine is an example of what kind of study. It's a randomized trial. It's an RCT. Now here is an example where we look at the Iowa Women's Health Study is an ongoing study in which researchers enrolled 41,836 women in 1986, and since today have continued to collect exposure and lifestyle information to assess the relationship between these factors and subsequent cancer. Is an example of which type of the study. It's a cohort. You have these women that we have been following over a period of time. That means we are looking at exposure here, right? So, and the outcome is measured in terms of the disease. Now here we're looking in terms of cancer. So exposure, when was the likely exposure that could have occurred, at what point in time, and how can we go back in time and show when it's likely to have occurred. Next is in a prospective cohort study, the measurement is glycolysis. In a case control study, it is the odds ratio. In a randomized clinical trial, the subject is assigned to the group by the investigator. Epidemic curve will provide the information following. Well, does anybody know the answer for this? Do you want to start? Why case control? Look at how the study has been presented to you. You're an infectious disease specialist in Pennsylvania, Department of Health. You're charged with the task of determining the relationship between autism and the use of MMR vaccine in Pennsylvania because there was a controversy. So the health department are asked you to go back and check some of their records. What do? You do a diligent search of the records of the year 2007 and set up a database. You carefully examine the database of bias and confounders, elimination of errors in the database, that's the bias and confounders, results in a data set of total of 520 records for 2007. So that's where we call it line listing. We go and clear the data, and finally, case by case is accumulated. So we had 620 records in 2007. Of the 520, 260 children were with autism. 135 of them have received the mumps, measles, and rubella vaccine. 125 of them did not receive the MMR vaccine. Of the 260 children that did not have autism, 120 of them received the vaccine, while 140 of them have not taken it. So it clearly shows you're looking at cases, looking at controls. And what is the determinant here? Whether they are vaccinated or not, and whether they have developed the autism. That's what we're trying to compare. So therefore, it becomes a case control study. In the process, we calculate the percentage. So the interpretation is in 2007, in Pennsylvania, children who received MMR vaccine were at one point for higher risk of autism as compared to those children who did not receive the vaccine. But again, we need to know this is just by saying it's 1.26-fold higher, does not make any sense. I need to build the confidence in this. I need to know whether it has a positive or a negative. So I need to do additional analysis in order to justify the value of 1.26, which are identified. Let's go with another example here. Varicella in an outbreak of chickenpox in Oregon in 2002. Varicella was diagnosed in 18 of the 152 children vaccinated, compared to 307 unvaccinated children. So what I've been asking you to do is to calculate. But what are we doing here? Calculating the risk premium. And ultimately, how do we interpret the data? In 2007, children that did not receive the varicella vaccine were 26 times more likely to develop chickenpox as compared to children who were vaccinated against chickenpox. Next problem, I will not go much through this. It's again another classic 2x2 table. And here we are calculating the sensitivity, specificity, and the predictive values. So it's pretty straightforward, nothing much to it. And then here, we'll leave the spot here. It's virtually the same that I have given as an example for you, but I've changed the numbers.
So what is the criteria for the two-question table in the room and in the fund?
So you're measuring disease and outcome. Exposure and outcome. Exposure to a given disease and what's the outcome. So if you're exposed, the possibility to make it infected, you will not get infected. You may develop the disease, you will not develop the disease. Are able to contact.
नहीं बहुत सारी नहीं दिख रहा है बहुत सारी ऑनलाइन नहीं दिख रहा है
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. Oh. Yeah. You can do it either way, but when you do the calculation, it will be also reversed.
Yeah.
You get that. But you don't go vertical, you go horizontal. You get it? You got the information right in the stats, but usually we reverse it. For example, we talk about see this right here. This is the exposure, and this is how. Yes. Yeah, so therefore the answer is different. Okay, but it's up to you, how you would like to put it. But assuming the formula that is there, you're able to change the numbers. A plus divided A plus B to be C divided by C.
मोबाइल
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't realize we were talking offline. So we are here talking about the rates, calculate the SIR values. We have gone through this in the last lecture yesterday. So here, when we look at it, what are we trying to do? We are trying to compute S prime. And what is S prime? Is the requirement for P and Q, which we have calculated, and the A value that we have determined is 0.x number of zeros, 25, and the number of days of infection is 1 by K, it's 0.1. And this is how we calculate the numbers. So keep in mind, don't forget to add the additional zeros here, because if we see it's 5%, here we have to add the additional 2 zeros in order to get the right answer. Is everybody on the same page? Okay, good. So here is something which
ठीक है ना
Let me do it. I can send you this particular folder also. Okay. So here, what I've done is taken information from actual studies done in the field, and I've utilized the data which they have identified and put them here for you to analyze. So the first study was looking at refugee camps in Sudan, whether they used chlorine as a disinfectant before they used it, and they were able to then calculate the odds ratio. They calculated an odds ratio of 0.6, confidence interval between 1.5 and 12.9. For the little y, that's okay. P-value is 0.02. So in terms of the first question I'm asking, what is the significance of the test? Significance of the test is it's significant based on the p-value. How do you interpret the odds ratio? When bleach is not used to disinfect toilets in the refugee camps, the risk of diarrhea is 3.64 higher as compared to using bleach. Here you have an intervention strategy that's the use of in the refugee. Next is the number of vaccines. The effect of vaccine reported, interesting that there is some effect. Is it really true? In order to do that, we build the confidence intervals between 0.2 and 0.7. Both of these values are below 1, and our p-value is 0.3. So their response question is, and the individuals are vaccinated against measles are 0.3-fold less likely to become infected with measles. The next is use of antibacterial soaps during the flu season. We found it to have no significance, and it had no effect. And this is one of the examples I've used in my slides about juvenile infertility that is caused by trichomonas. Again, it's 1.9 per higher. Talk about herpes. Are you clear with this? Does it make sense? That's it. And these are the different steps in how do you do an disease investigation. We can do several of them at the same time, at one given time, or work through it step by step. It's the approach is largely dependent on the person who's doing it. So with that, I'm done. Anything else? I'm going to share this file with you. I'll ask Oscar to wait here to upload it for you guys so that if in the process, if you're going to use this as a test of a questionnaire for your students, the materials are already ready for you. Anything else? Any questions that are online?
Sir, I have one doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, suppose regarding the estimation of economic losses, because for any disease outbreak or if there is a mortality or morbidity, because in our project that we were working on hydatidosis and cysticercosis. So there we used to estimate the economic losses. So in that direct losses as well as indirect losses. So direct losses, we considered that whatever the affected organs that we used to condemn at the after the slaughter and after the check postmortem examinations, whatever the organs were there or the carcasses were there. So that were the direct losses. And we used to consider the indirect losses. So that were the there is a weight loss in the animals, and there is a reduction in the milk production. So we used to refer that some of the articles, some international articles we used to refer. But many a times when I used to present that in my project outreach program on zoonotic diseases, many a times in the councils, they were asking because they were having the many a times that how you have calculated that economic losses in Maharashtra as well as in India. Many slaughterhouses are there. I used to consider that the registered slaughterhouses like Epida, that 3,600, or the suppose one means whatever the prevalence we got. So based on that, because there are the some of the formulas are there, but still the questions are there. What are the ways that to estimate the economic losses? Suppose in Ludhiana also they were doing for brucellosis. So please guide in this regard for estimation of losses.
Estimation of losses can be done in two ways. One is whether there is morbidity or whether there's mortality. So in case of your disease, what you're looking for, it's more of morbidity than mortality. Is that the right way of looking at it? So say if there are 100 cows with high datidosis, how many of them will survive? Will all 100 survive? That's the first question you're going to ask. So your model becomes more related to the morbidity of infection. So morbidity of infection, what are some of the losses due to morbidity? As you first said, is loss of weight. Next is when the animal is slaughtered is the organs. To what level do you see total condemnation of the carcass? How many of them do you see? So those are some of the values that you will require in order to understand if there is a significant difference between a healthy cow and your deceased cow. So you need a comparison. So if it is a healthy cow with the liver weighs 10 kilos and your liver weighs 5 kilos, or the high diet because of the high diet and shrinking of different shape and sizes of the liver because of gradations of cirrhosis that may have occurred along with high dietidosis. So it's virtually has to be destroyed. So what is the market value of 10 kilo of liver? So that's the way I would approach it. So more or less you require the prevalence rates. How many cows in a slaughterhouse are really positive? Have you done the weights of these animals that are with SIDS? Assuming you know unknown, the animal comes in, you weigh the animal, you slaughter. And so with high datidosis, without high datidosis, so you've got two groups. One becomes the case, another becomes the control. Then you can follow them over a period of time, weigh their livers and say difference in the weight in livers. And all that you can do is a simple t-test to say there's a significance in loss. And then you can compute the value of monetary values in terms of losses. Okay, so, and you can indirectly go back and say if there is a weight loss of 10%, what is the loss in muscle tissue? So those estimates you can do. We know if there is a certain percent of muscle mass on a carcass, but is it related to weight? If it is related to weight, what is the likely change? Again, there is the breed specification that will have to also come in because some breeds do not show so very clear signs of loss of muscle mass. So we need to be very careful with the type of animals that we are working with also at that point in time. You need to refer Sri Kumar Pillai's thesis of 1992, done in our department. He has done the entire work on it. And he worked in Nagar on that export farm, export slaughterhouse you have in Aurangabad. Yes. Alana. So he went and did all of his data collection from there. And then we went to Tata Institute of Fundamental Research because we did not have those kind of computers to do the analysis. So we got it done there. Yeah, it's a fantastic data set. And he has published all his papers. That's the best thing I like. He published it. So there's the thesis should be there in the department. I think that would be a good start for you to look at what are the estimates because we were doing measurements and then we were trying to do correlations. Yeah, so that would be a good start for you to look at it. It's in our own department. We don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah. That we have done, sir. We have published also.
Yes.
In our that high datidosis, we have published in Acta Parasitologica journal.
Right.
We have got the
Super.
that news, yeah.
Super. Yep.
And even for cystic sarcosis, that is it's Turkish veterinary journal. We have published one article. In that, we have mentioned about the economic losses also.
Another person to talk about, if you're really talking about One Health and epidemiology, there is a person his name is Zinstag, Zinstagg. Just Google him. He has done some phenomenal models, calculations, how to calculate economic losses related to One Health disease conditions. We can use that. The way he has done that, we can use it to compute your numbers for hydatidosis. So look up Zinstag, very prolific publisher, very well known, especially in terms of economics and One Health. I do see there are a lot of questions. Again, to begin with, my sincere apologies. The document that I was sharing with the answers was not in the share mode in the WebEx. So what I'm proposing to do is I'm going to be asking Dr. Vaidya to share with you the actual answer sheet that I presented a few minutes ago. So he will be doing it by this afternoon or later today.
Yeah.
So you should have it with you.
Yes.
So again, my apologies. Didn't read the document I was talking about in the class.
Yes, I will share. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Actually, sir, one of the important concern, particularly with everyone here, is the sampling, and particularly the sample size, because most of our studies are, can say, it is not the active type of surveillance what we carry out. Because most of us, we are not involved in as such in the disease, infectious disease epidemiology. Most of us, we are doing it as active surveillance. For example, if I want to start any surveillance, any study, maybe pertaining to the prevalence of the mastitis in dairy animals, actually considering whether it will be the more apt to precisely define the sample first and then to go ahead, or it is as geography.
Do you know the prevalence of mastitis in the herd? That question, I'm sure the answer is no, right? So when you don't know the answer, you go with a 50% level of thing. Instead of pursuing, say you have 3% prevalence rate of mastitis. But if you don't know, put 50%. That will allow you to collect a sample size, do that analysis, and based on that, go back and say, this is the true prevalence, and use that to do a larger study. So there is a pre-study that is always needed if you don't know the prevalence study. We say at a 50% sample rate, but you don't discard it. You use that data. But if they say it comes and says out of 100 animals, you say the infection rate is 50, we assume there are 50 animals that you would sample at a given point in time. So if amongst these 50 animals, only 6 of them show a positive, that means you know what the prevalence rate is. So then we would use that at the population level in that given geographical area, assuming the management practices are similar, people are doing the same thing, they are having the same kind of management practices, because mastitis is largely a management problem. So if there are similar management practices, then you can go with a level of confidence to say Yeah, I found 3%. I'm willing to use that in order to use that for sampling.
Next time, another important aspect is considering the mastitis only. There could be multiples of the causative factors, or you can see the compounding factors for that. May it could be the hygiene, maybe could be the environment, may it could be some other factors. And if you want to study the correlation between these factors, say for example there are 1, 2, 3, 4 factors which may be.
Can I bring up one of my papers? I can
No,
do
one
that.
second.
I can show that. I've done the same thing. I've looked at management practices and outcomes in
Yeah.
the quality of milk.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Actually, that was the concern. Yeah.
So I can bring that up to you, and I can show you how we did the analysis too.
Sure.
It's in the Journal of Dairy Science, so you can pull that up. It is with Pillai, Sri Kumar Pillai. I
Okay.
published that.
Okay.
paper. So
Okay.
we looked at several risk factors. One of the things we looked was bedding. What kind of bedding do you use? What kind of pre and post tips are being used? Those are the two measures that we tend to use, or how many number of times the cows are milked. Sometimes they milk 3 times a day. Sometimes they just milk 2, the standard we are doing. So we did find that bedding had a significant influence on the outcome of the number of bacteria in the bulk tank milk. So ultimate endpoint measurement was the bulk tank milk. What is the total count? What is the coliform count? What is the, we would say as a thermophilic count? Because that's ultimately you're going to cook the milk, right? Or boil the milk. And then we look at lac pasteurization counts, or what we call as psychotropic counts. If you are able to store the milk in a refrigerator, how long will it last? Ideally, in our market, we would expect the milk to last for about 14 days. After you're pasteurized, you bottled it and you put it in a plastic jug. It stays for about 14 days. But it so happens most of the fluid milk is consumed within 3 days. So that's not really an issue for us. So the major issue for us is the milk that is stored in the silos and then later on used to make products. Say, if I have a milk sample taken from a farm that has very high somatic cell counts, very high bacterial counts, and storage temperature is okay, say it's around 10 degrees. You're not even able to get 7, you're around 10. It still gives opportunities for these bacteria to break up the proteins, chew those caseins off, utilize the fat, make it foul smelling. And then when you make products out of it, you will lose a lot of the product in the making process itself because the protein is degraded. And when you make cheese, I was talking about this example to some of my colleagues earlier, is I buy 100 kilos of milk and I put it in a tank and I bring it up to 42 degrees. I throw in the rennet and then I go back and throw in the starter culture. And 6 hours later, I expect the curd to be set so that I can cut it to make cheese, right? That's the process. But when you cut the cheese, a lot of the material is drained out. So along with your proteins and fat also go, and the yield is significantly lower as compared to a good quality milk. So the indices that you use to measure the quality of milk becomes very important down the line, especially for developing products. So that's the reason why we looked at bulk tank as one of the reasons. And you look at the, if you're there, I've walked through the steps how to do the analysis. So, and I think I spoke with Archana yesterday about it. Yep. Yep. Right. We look at this. Also there.
Hello. Sir, many times we design a project for PG student, which seems to be very, very simple, straightforward. We are more interested in estimating the pre, say for example, we are VPH person, but we generally do not ask any question. Neither our ORW or thesis is having that type of format. Means what hypothesis you have generated, how you are going to test it, what would be the ultimate outcome. So therefore we are getting, now, after going through this 10 days training, I came to know that whatever projects I must have designed, probably there were so many lacunas in that. Okay.
Even with me.
Yeah.
Just
so
not you. Even
now, one thing is very, very clear to me that I should ask first question and how I will get that answer. That answer will be ultimately benefited to the society. This is how I think a project must be designed. So what questions should be asked while designing a project which is a simple project of 6 months or like that, sir?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the coffin. It took us 10 days, but finally we are here. So the first and the foremost thing is once you decide a project, I'm not a statistician, nor are you. I would send my student to say, design the study, sit with the statistician, and do the entire sample processing, what the number of samples you require, how do you collect your samples, how do you process, what analytic tools that you need to utilize, what kind of statistical methods do you need to do an analysis. For example, I'm doing a cohort study. What kind of analytic methods I would be requiring? What is the sample size I would be requiring so that by the end of 1 year of the study, my attrition is less than 1%? Because you're going to lose cases, you're going to lose controls. How do I look at my sample size in order to prevent the attrition of samples over a period of time? That's the first thing. And they have the methods to do it. And it's better that the student works with a biostatistician because he sees another perspective, not from the way I think. So that kind of enriches the student to look at and say, oh yes, I've been asked to evaluate 2 different vaccines against mycoplasma in a dairy calf operation. How do I develop an RCT, randomized clinical trial? How do I select the animals? What vaccine is given to what animal, what is not given to the other animal? So RCTs become a very important way of saying. So let's again go back the wheel farm where we did a study looking at the efficacy of mycoplasma vaccines, and that's also published in the Journal of Vaccine. And the hypothesis and that study has been done by my PhD student, Marty Sunland, which shows how we went and designed the study. So after designing the study, how we gave the vaccines that were commercially available in the market. And then we went and calculated whether there was an immunity that was developed or not developed. And then we compared the 2 different models to see if there is an effect of the vaccine between the vaccines or amongst the vaccines. So that's one of the ways of doing is exactly is for mycoplasma, we studied the vaccine. It's an RCT sample. Even if you're trying to go and look at the effect of chlorine or bleach, it's an RCT. Anything that you look for in an intervention, let's go for an RCT model, okay?
As far as this RCT is concerned, another important dilemma, or you can say a standard process, what most of the times is adopted is you take the 2 groups and take the replicates.
You can have 3 groups. You can
So
have 5
3,
groups.
4,
Yeah,
5.
whatever
But
groups.
my major concern is it is a magic figure. Somewhere it is a 6 replicates. Most of the times it needs to be. And what about that magic?
The logic to madness. So the logic process here is how many number of replicates you're going to do largely depends on the standard deviation of your first set of analysis. If the standard deviation is too high, then you need more replicates. If your standard deviation is pretty tight, less than 1, with 3 replicates, you can get away. Okay, the thumb rule is it is 2 standard deviations, I need 6. If it is more than 2 standard deviations, forget it. The study is not going to work for you. So those are some of the thumb rules we typically tend to use in order to design number of replicates, especially when we are doing animals kept in pens. How many replicates do I need to have in order to see if there are differences between the pens and amongst the pens, and pens combined on another farm, right? So in order to do that, we need to know what is the prevalence of the given condition between the birds or the animals in that given pen. What is the standard deviation? And if the standard deviation is less than 1, between 1 and 2, you can then say, I'm comfortable going with 3 different replicates. But many a times it may so happen that even with 3 replicates, you may not get the kind of anticipated results. So it may require, you may have to go back and do additional more replicates. Okay, that is left to, again, your decision between you and the biostatistician. If you're not able to meet the thresholds, need to go back and talk to your statistician about it. You can design the study, but it's always best to have a fresh pair of eyes to take a look at your numbers. Yeah, we can do all of these calculations, but ultimately we need the one, especially a biostatistician. Don't go to a statistician from the College of Engineering. You need to go to a biostatistician who has a better understanding of the biological processes and diseases, who would be in a better position to understand you. It's more important is to understand you. We have some services that we initially tried in 2002, 2003. The statistics department opened up a consulting center free of cost. So graduate students would offer consultancy. So PhD students. And many a times, the rather unfortunate, the student who was providing the advice did not fully comprehend when I say I'm going to be doing a trial between two different vaccines and I'm looking at this particular set of interval. That didn't really set in the individual. So it took me a little while to sit with those people and try and make them understand. It's largely left on you, is to make them appreciate the study design you're looking at and how do you compute those numbers into it.
Any kind of designing that type of studies, how many years, 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, there are several types of
Right, right. What species? What species are you working?
For example, I want to see changing the air effect.
Okay.
Now,
Which species?
which may be
Species of animal.
okay. This is cattle.
Cattle. Okay. Okay.
What should be the minimum duration of study? Or how many
So
years we should-
when you look at cattle, are you looking at calves? Are you looking at lactating cattle? Are you looking at beef cattle? Or are you looking at cattle that are dry cows? What are you looking at? And where are you targeting, looking for this AMR, either in milk or in feces or in the respiratory tract? Where are you looking for? So once you have your ideas set in stone at that point in time, then it becomes easier for us to say, how do you design the study, right? So you're going to be looking for AMR in milk. AMR in milk, that means you're looking mainly lactating cows. And when you look at AMR patterns in lactating cows, you need to understand the pathophysiology of mastitis. It's just not you have a cow, she has mastitis, you collect the sample. When you look at the pathophysiology of mastitis, we tend to see the occurrence of infections occur at the start of the lactation and nearly during the time when we are drying off the cows. So we tend to see a very high prevalence incidence of mastitis in cows with day 1, day 2 in milk. Especially for us, because these are high producing cows. We produce close to 30 to 40 pounds of milk. So it's huge amount. We tend to see in these cows a higher incidence of mastitis, mainly due to gram-negatives, coliforms, Klebsiella, E. coli, and other related species, day 1, day 2, day 3. And that's the time we typically tend to lose those cows. If it is an E. coli mastitis, if not done a J5 vaccine, we tend to have very serious outcomes. So that's one area I would target. I wouldn't target all 300 days. Then another area I would target is during the dry period. So when the cow is being dried into the next lactation because she's pregnant and you want to give her rest, we tend to see a change in the physiology of the milk. So now the physiology of the milk favors gram-positive organisms. So you tend to see higher prevalence of streptococcus and staphylococci, a higher prevalence of gram-positives. So what is of your preference? You want to do before, you want to do after, or you want to do both, or you want to say, let me just look at the mid-lactation. We're looking at mid-lactation, very, very little, unless and until the cow is really bad udder. That's a different story. But in most well-managed herds, if if it is well-managed herds, my incidence of mastitis during and around calving should be less than 2%. And the cows that I'm drying off should have a somatic cell count less than 300,000 and should not contain any major pathogens. So if the somatic cell counts go over 500,000, I dry treat her with dry cow preparation. And that means the antibiotic which I put in her stays for about 40 days. So we're assuming that the cow goes through a 60-day dry period. That means I will not see any residues of those antibiotics in the colostrum or in the milk. So that's the whole purpose of where you would like to focus and do your studies.
Study the incidence of mastitis, and you want to go for retrospective study.
Yes.
What is the trend of last 5 years or 10 years? So, as an epidemiologist, sir, while designing this type of study, how many years you will go back while estimating that trend?
That's a
Yeah.
good question. What I would do is, how is your data organized? So in order to obtain the data, the first column is year. Second is the age of the cow and what lactation stage. So those become very important. We know cows in third and fourth lactations tend to have a higher incidence of mastitis as compared to the cows in the first and second lactation.
Okay.
So there is an age difference that also comes into the process. And you will see in that bulk tank study we did, we found cows with the higher percentages of third and fourth lactations, really contributing to very high somatic cell counts and bacterial contamination of the milk. So looking at it from that perspective, so those are the things that I will initially read is the year, the cow, the lactation number, the number of days in milk, and what was isolated from milk. So if you isolated Streptococcus uberis or you isolated an E. coli. So in the process, you can start by age, you can start by lactation, and then kind of come and see, are you seeing a clustering of events of certain pathogen around a given time? Okay. So you can see the clustering of events that you're seeing strep uberis come typically. I know this is almost close to drying off, or the udder is so bad, she's picking up the environmental mastitis pathogens like Streptococcus uberis, somewhere in the middle of the process.
Great.
No, there's nothing here. The thing, yeah, so, yeah, I didn't get any emails so far. I don't.
So, request to online participants, if you want to ask any questions, for any discussion, you can please ask to sir. Sir is available now. If you have any doubts, any questions regarding the epidemiology, please you can ask. Online participants. You can directly ask the questions. So, one question is there, sir, in the chat box. In studies involving antibiotic resistance gene analysis of pooled milk samples, what should be the ideal sample size?
So is
Sonali Sahu is there.
okay. Hi, Sonali. So the way I interpret your question, it says, for example, in studies involving antibiotic resistance gene analysis of pooled milk samples, what should be the ideal sample size? I don't really have an answer for your question, honestly. Uh, it's kind of, I've started scratching my head around trying to see how best I can come up with something. Can I ask you a few questions in order to get some clarity from where you're coming from? When we are looking at,
Sonali, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
If you can unmute yourself, and I would be happy to chat with you.
Sonali, can you hear? Sonali. I think she want to know, I think that pooled milk samples. So in the pooled.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes. Please, you can ask.
Hi, Sonali. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
So Sonali, are you pulling the milk yourself, or somebody else is pulling it for you?
No, sir, I'm pulling the milk myself.
You're pulling it from yourself. So what kind of a dairy herd is this?
So the milk samples, they are collected from unorganized dairy farms. They are
Oh,
scattered.
okay, they're from organized dairy farms. Why are you doing this study?
Just to know the resistance, what kind of resistance genes are prevalent in a particular region. To know.
So Sonali, when you look at the kind of study you're doing, it is more amenable to look at it as a qualitative study rather than a quantitative study. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I would more look at it as a qualitative approach. So you pick these samples, you isolate the bacteria, and then look for the resistance genes. And that would be a good start because you're not trying to compute to say how many of these isolates have these genes. If you're looking at them, the approach is different, but you're really looking at the genes. When you're looking at the genes, you need to identify, you need to say what organism you're focusing upon. So here you can't take a genetic pool and say, I found the MECAB genes and I found resistance to neomycin, genes resistant to colistin sulfate or MDR resistance in other organisms. But that's not going to tell you much as to where you'll be taking, because I had a similar issue with another colleague of mine here yesterday who was asking me the same question. The approach I would do here is to take your pooled milk samples, make a serial dilution, and so that you get between 20 to 200 organisms, and then pick randomly 10 different organisms, species identify them, and then go and look for the antibiotic resistance genes in them. And more importantly, the value of the study will be significantly enhanced if you know the use of antibiotics on that organized herd. Without that, the study will not carry any weightage because you're trying to relate the antibiotic resistance genes that you're seeing in addition to whether such antibiotics are being used on the organized farm. Another important thing that if you look back in the last 2 to 3 years, people who have been working in the field of antimicrobial resistance and genes especially, we have found that mobile genetic elements play a significant role in changing the antibiotic resistance profiles in a given population. So in addition to looking for AMR genes, I would also suggest that you go and screen for transposons, integrons, plasmids, all sorts of mobile
So your voice
genetic
is not
elements.
audible, sir.
What's it? Okay, can you hear me now? Is it much better? Sonali, can you hear me? Oops. Sonali, are you still there? Yeah, but can you hear me?
Can anybody please confirm that their voice is audible?
It's audible.
Okay, great. So the way I would approach this study is depending upon the length of the study and the kind of study you plan to do, the way you have posed your question, it largely looks like that it's a more or sort of a qualitative study than a quantitative. So when it's not a quantitative study, I would question why are we looking at a sample size? But if you'd like to put a different spin on the process, what I would do is I would look at it from a quantitative point, looking at different pathogens that you see in milk. Say, for example, you can focus on one single pathogen or you can say coliforms. Just look at coliforms, identify the different coliforms, speciate them, look at the resistance to the antibiotics, both phenotypically and genotypically, looking at the AMR genes. In addition to that, as I was speaking, perhaps I was not able to get through you, is to look at mobile genetic elements, which is the central piece in understanding the transmission dynamics of antibiotic resistance. So if you do not do the analysis for mobile genetic elements that includes transposons, integrons, plasmids, anything that's you would find as a DNA piece that is shifting from one bacteria to another, these mobile genetic elements add a lot more information as it relates to the transmission of these genes. So later on, I would go back and then calculate the transfer frequencies in an experimental stage. Say, for example, we have found BLAST-CMY2 in an E. coli, and that's on a transferable plasmid. I would go and then do an experiment where I would take an E. coli with an inbuilt kanamycin resistance on it and see if I'm able to do the transfer of this plasmid, and more importantly, assess what is the frequency of transfer. Does it transfer at a very high frequency? That means if you made these organisms, one out of every 10 organisms, or one out of every 100, or one of every 1,000, or one of every 100,000. So that gives you a kind of an estimate. What is the likelihood of transfer of a given antibiotic resistance gene through a mobile genetic element using experimental conditions to prove that, yes, there's a quantitative aspect of it. And here I'm characterizing BLAST-CMY2 gene or TEM1 gene in an E. coli to see the rate of transfer. So that's the way I would look at it if you are planning to do a quantitative study. But the way I would look at it, based on the question you gave me, it's more of a qualitative study. Does that help you?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Got it, sir.
You're welcome. Yep. So the examples of primary, secondary, and tertiary is primary care is generally primary intervention. The most simplest of the form is education, right? So you would educate the target audience. Primary in certain instances can be the use of a vaccine. So depending on the given disease or the condition, we can say that the primary method of prevention of the disease is either through vaccination, good education, or other processes that we typically tend to use is segregation, quarantine, or keeping distance. The secondary would be more, I would say, is using of masks, sanitation, hand washes, like we did in COVID. When it comes to tertiary, is the tertiary treatments largely will depend on the status of the disease condition on the individual. So if the individual grows into a chronic stage of the disease, then we do more so to relieve the pain or alleviate the pain. Okay. So depends on what is the nature of the tertiary condition. But many a times when we say tertiary, the patient is no more going to live beyond an X amount of time. So what do we do? Palliative treatment becomes the tertiary care. Okay. So we give the right kind of pain medication, the right kind of medication to sustain the individual, because we know that the life expectancy has significantly reduced. So again, these are some of the examples that we typically use in epidemiology to understand what do we mean by primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Okay, so Daljit, you're asking me a question.
Yeah.
Say you're working on Klebsiella for milk. What should be the minimum sample size for the given surveillance study?
Yeah.
Again,
Madam, she is working at Mahu Veterinary College.
Okay,
She is
great.
a professor of microbiology.
Oh, fantastic. Nice to meet you, Daljit. So,
Hello, sir.
um,
Sir, as you explained, we are working on
Yeah.
single pathogen.
okay.
We
So-
work on specified pathogen, single pathogen. We do AMR, antibiotic microbial studies,
Okay.
phenotypically as well as at the gene level.
Okay, great. So here, what you require is not the number of samples. You require the number of isolates. Okay? So you require the number of isolates from different animals, from different time periods, so that you can build a kind of a study around it. So the size typically will not matter. You'll have to keep on, sampling milk till you get a sufficient number of Klebsiella pneumonia or Klebsiella oxytoca, one of the two. What you're really looking at is the number of isolates over a period of time in years or herds. More the diversity of your Klebsiella isolates from different sources, the better you're off in understanding the AMR profiles. Okay. So
Okay.
definitely the sample size would not be relevant, but the sample size of the number of Klebsiella that you have would be the starting point.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Then I think small study or incidence of Klebsiella should be done, like prevalence of Klebsiella, and then we can go for more data.
It's only looking at the characteristics. So you start off when we look at it is you get a sample. Now, if you get a sample, the first thing I classify is, again, I need to know the cow, the lactation, age, those things you have. Next is the sample. What kind of a sample is it? Is it a subclinical sample? Is it a chronic sample? Is it an acute sample? Is it clinical sample? Okay, so that becomes the classification of the sample type. So, right. So what kind of sample is it? When you take a sample and put it in a test tube and see it is becoming yogurt, it's either subclinical mastitis. But if you see formation of milk waste separating out with a tinge of blood, it's very difficult to touch. The udder is very difficult to touch. You're in the clinical stage. Okay, the chronic phase kind of varies between the two. The milk looks fairly normal, but it's almost a chronic condition. We tend to see this in cows in the fifth, sixth, seventh, even I would say fourth, fifth, sixth lactations. That's where we tend to see a higher incidence of chronic cows, especially with Staph aureus. It's a major issue with us, chronic Staph aureus infections in a later stage. So with Klebsiella, again, the approach that I would take if you're looking at is different farms, different herds. So then you can correlate and say, oh yes, I've isolated Klebsiella samples more frequently from clinical samples or from subclinical samples or chronic samples. That itself is a good data set to tell you where you're going from. And then how do you utilize that set of information? Who is going to benefit from the data set? Is it a practicing veterinarian or a microbiologist, or are you trying to make an autogenous vaccine for the herd? Okay.
First data will help the veterinarian or the farmer.
Yes.
The remaining data will help us.
Well, yeah. So the first set of data will tell you, yes, there's antibiotic resistance genes. And based on that, you will come back and say, of the 50 Klebsiella isolates that I isolated, 40 of them are resistant to third generation cephalosporin. That itself is a good indicator. And more importantly, I mentioned in my previous lectures is, please start doing MICs. So that we take the veterinarian who actually just punches the cow with an antibiotic is to little bit start thinking and saying, oh, this is the MIC value. I can't use ceftriaxone. Let me see what else I can use based on the MIC values. So you're moving him more from an empirical to evidence-based treatment, which should at least help us in the long run to address AMRs.
Using the antibiotics, depending upon which antibiotics are actually available in the field.
Okay, that's another concern. Yes, yeah. Okay, and also
Instead that I perform in our last studies is that we selected all the antimicrobial resistant, like Pneumonia staphylococcus, which were resistant to more than 3 antibiotics.
Okay.
And then we treated them with green nanoparticles.
Okay.
We synthesized nanoparticles, characterized them, and tried to see the efficacy with MIC
Okay.
as an alternative therapy.
Okay.
So that was the third part. So
Did you see any
these
resistance
can-
to
yeah.
things like colistin or
Yes.
anything? You found resistance to
Yes,
colistin?
we are getting these samples resistant to every antibiotic that we are with. Every antibiotic, 8, 10 antibiotics, we will get the samples in our area.
Yeah.
Minimum 3 antibiotics, they are resistant. Different groups of 3 antibiotics. That is the now major problem with us. How to give the results to the veterinarians or farmers.
We face similar issues, but on a very smaller
Because
scale.
in our college, whatever the samples we are receiving in our laboratory, those are the animals which are treated for very long time. And almost all of them are in chronic cases, like what you have mentioned. And all are, most of them are showing staphylococcal infections. And most of these times they are resistant. So actually, we are not taking the samples from the field. We are getting the samples from the veterinarians in our locality.
Okay.
And they send the samples which are actually not treatable. Means they are exhausted by using all the antibiotics, and then they send the samples to us. So when we do AST, almost they are resistant to all the antibiotics. Then what to suggest for the treatment? That is the question.
Good point. See, honestly,
And
there's
still,
no
one
real
more-
answer.
one-
So in this case, what I would typically do, if I'm on a herd and if this cow is in late lactation, she has already given most of the given milk, I would dry the udder off.
We should go for dry.
I just take chlorhexidine. Again, off the records, I would use chlorhexidine and kill the quarter.
That is the best remedy.
So when she freshens again, it usually revives back.
Because this is the limiting factor in our field. Nobody goes for drying. And if they go for
They-
drying, they don't go for dry.
If you don't give a sufficient amount of dry period, she'll do poorly in the
She's
next lactation.
exhausted completely.
Yeah, she's
So
doing
as
very
you got,
poorly in
as
the
you
next.
mentioned, sir, we are getting the mastitis cases within, say, in between 4th, 5th lactation, maximum
Okay.
cases.
Right.
And they are very much non-treatable.
Okay. It's, yeah, it's not unusual to see.
Particularly, I think most of us they will agree that what is the field scenario is most of the times whenever the farmer notices okay there is a slight flex in the milk or something or he will have some directly he will go to the chemist. He will buy the over the counter.
Everything is available.
And again, many times the pharmacist will suggest you, this is a new one, we can try this. So some permutation combinations first the farmer will do. Then if the still the problem persists, then he will contact most of the time the paravet who is readily available. Then the paravet will come here again, he will try some of his combinations. And again, if the problem persists, then the veterinarian will be contacted. And then finally, if suppose, and then the last result, then the college
Then they
approach the
And then they
being the
expect that we have to do the review.
yes.
And so what to suggest is this?
So one of the things that we have found some level of success, not too much, works on a few cases, has worked for us on a few cases is to give oxytocin and keep stripping the cow every 4 hours, every 3 hours. Just strip, keep stripping. Whatever is possible, just empty the process out. And once you empty it out, I would, and if she's again close to late lactation, either I kill the quarter or I usually close the quarter with a long-acting dry cow preparation. And I seal it with an RBC. So I seal the T10 with almost like a plasticine-like material so that although the udder will be swollen and under pressure, but it will not be producing any more milk. So we do get RBC. It's called as RBC. Yeah, it'll be a good one, especially to look at whether you're able to control.
We can select the cows in red lactans.
Yeah.
Convince the farmer to go 45 cow with long-acting antibiotic.
And then when she comes back and see how well she does, that itself is a great measurement. You can have a few cows with the same condition, and I'm sure you guys can do somatic cell counts.
Yes.
So we generally first run the milk on somatic cells, greater than 300,000. I usually will.
Screening test we use
Yeah.
CMT. We use.
CMT, okay. And that sounds pretty good. That also works well. What's it? I'm fine. I'm having a good time.
That Dr. Vijay Kumar
Okay,
accepted our request to visit that KM Hospital, Department of Veterinary Medicine, Preventive Medicine and Community Medicine. So immediately after lunch, we will go to KM Hospital for
Okay.
visit.
okay.
So that will be there. And before that, whatever the now, if you have whatever the queries are there, we will discuss with sir. Because after lunch, we will go to KM Hospital. That Dr. Vijay Kumar Singh is there. He is the head of the department, and we have requested him for because they are also doing many epidemiological work. So we will go there after immediately after the lunch because before 2 o'clock we have to reach there. So we will arrange lunch at 1 o'clock so that we can reach there at 2 o'clock. And whatever the discussions will be there afternoon. So discussions will be there only. Afterwards, tomorrow there will be validatory program. So yeah,
I think you
and
need to tell only for.
validity will be there for all online as well as
Oh, is it?
offline participants. They will also there because university authorities will also be there for the function.
Okay.
And I think afterwards there will be a group photo session. Group photo session will be there. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, I request the online participants. You can, if you have any doubts, please you can ask now. Otherwise, we will break for 5-10 minutes.
We don't have cases of brucellosis. We have eradicated brucellosis, except in one state of Montana, where we see it in the wild bison populations. Whereas we are seeing a major issue of Brucella canis in dogs. And I've not received any samples for testing for Brucella. And even if it is Brucella, it has to be done only in certain labs who have been given the permission by the National Veterinary Laboratory to do the isolation and identification. So my lab has refused to do it. The largely being is we don't want to get into a reportable disease. It's a reportable disease. So I think Dr. Gandge is going to be working with my colleague, Dr. Khatani, on brucellosis. So maybe you need to. Oh, okay. Okay, and that's what she was talking about. And she was
That
talking.
was actually my first. That was my PhD.
Okay, so what Roe is likely to be asking is she wants to do a survey of animals to see how many of them are positive for Brucella, largely isolating the organism. And then, where is it? Do you have the isolates? Okay. Okay, so we are looking for isolates because we have, yeah. So we have isolates from many parts of the world. And we have hardly any, in fact, we don't have anything from India. So we were a little curious if you have the permissions to send us the DNA, we will do the sequencing for you. And of course, the results is yours. So we were more looking at it from that point of view. And you're a collaborator on the project. So and she wants to talk to us about us doing a survey here, actually going and putting in, vaginal swabs or milk samples, whatever you feel is more convenient for you to collect.
to work in testing the animals.
So you're using RB51? No problem. Even if I isolate RB51, then if it is there in the milk or if it is there in the uterus, it's a diva. So it is got an insertion of a rifampicin gene. So if I look for the rifampicin gene in a brucella, this is the vaccine strain. I'm not worried about it. I'm really not worried about it. We can figure that out in a matter of a day.
What is the procedure to get admitted in the lab post-op?
So largely, it's either I have a project and I'm looking for people, or it's sponsored from your university. Either two ways. So my status is I'm going to retire in 2.5 years. I'm looking for the sunset. So I'm not actively writing any grants unless and until there is something that I really get excited and fired up. Yep. Yes, Campylobacter. He spent a lot of time working on Campylobacter. Yeah. How are the facilities in your place? Good?
Yeah, good. In this situation.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Very good. Okay. Super.
Only the paucity is being reserved staff.
And that's, I can see that everybody's talking about it. Yeah.
Light coming.
रजिस्ट्रेशन तर मेन्शनच केलेलं नाही करायचं
ट्रेनिंग करा ना का गप्पा मारायला पाठवलं का तुम्हाला तिथं तुम्हाला गप्पा मारायला पाठवलं का म्हणलं तिथं ते अच्छा हो हो ठीक आहे
हा हॅलो काळवागे सर
सफाईची का
Yeah. So good afternoon to everyone. So online as well as offline participants, now we have closed the discussions because discussion part is already over. We have requested the online participants and many participants, they have participated. So I request the online participants, if you have any doubts, if you have any queries, you can email your questions to Dr. Bhushan sir. He is available to you. And now I request you, as because today afternoon we are visiting to Department of Veterinary Medicine, community veterinary community medicine to KM Hospital. So there will be visit to the offline participants. So for you, just you can prepare yourself for any, if you have any again the problems and all. And tomorrow, I request you tomorrow at 12 o'clock, you have to join because there will be validatory function at 12:30. So 12:30 p.m. there will be validatory function afternoon. So you have to join at 12 o'clock so that half an hour again discussion will be there. If you have any doubts, discussion will be there. Once again, I thank you very much, all of you, for your your participations and all, for your cooperation. Thank you very much. We will meet you, tomorrow afternoon at 12 o'clock. Thank you.
ये सर पार्टी का प्राइमर्स एंड ये सारे लेडीज क्या ये क्या एक दो चाय बना दे आपने भी